Welcome everyone to our today's webinar. My name is Maxentine Newman, and I'm a lecturer in education and a fellow at the center here. And today we are happy to have Professor Tyrone Howard with us. And his presentation is going to be called Equity Now, Preparing Educators During Turbulent Times. So it's a very timely topic, of course. In this address, Tyrone Howard talks about the need to reimagine how teachers are prepared for today's climate, offering evidence-based practices, strategies, and policies. Howard offers a path forward for how teacher preparation can play a role in transformation. A couple of words about our speaker today. Tyrone Howard is the Pritzker Family Endowed Chair and Professor of Education in the School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA. A leading expert in race, culture, and educational equity, Dr. Howard's research focuses on issues of access and opportunity for minoritized student populations. He has published over 100 scholarly works, including peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and technical reports. Among his best-selling books are Why Race and Culture Matter in Schools, All Students Must Thrive, and his latest work, Equity Now, Justice, Repair, and Belonging. So Equity Now is kind of also part of the title of today's talk, which was recognized, this book, by Greater Good magazine as one of the top 10 favorite books for educators in 2024. Howard is the founder and director of the UCLA Black Male Institute and co-director of the UCLA Pritzker Center for Strengthening Children and Families. He also serves as faculty director of the UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools. So once again, a title very similar to the title of our center. In 2024, Dr. Howard served as president of American Education Research Association, the world's largest organization devoted to educational research and policy. A native of Compton, California, Dr. Howard began his career as a classroom teacher in the Compton Unified School District. He is a member of both the National Academy of Education and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has been recognized by Education Week as one of the 200 most influential scholars shaping educational practice, policy, and reform. And also, I think it's important to mention that Tyrone joined us in Glasgow as a panelist for the relaunch event of CenTCS in March, traveling all the way from California to Glasgow, and we're very grateful for that. Without further ado, Tyrone, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Max. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with you all. I had the good fortune, as Max mentioned, to be able to come to Glasgow last March and had a really wonderful time and learned a lot about what you all are doing. So I want to say big shout out and big thank you to Brianna and to Eileen for being gracious hosts and for really helping me to understand more about the work that you all are doing there in the center. It's very similar to some of the work that we do here in our Center for the School of Transformation, where we're trying to really understand like larger structural issues that impact schools, and in particular, looking at how we prepare teachers and how we prepare leaders to work in those schools. So always good to think about how we can work collaboratively. We're struggling with some of the same issues that you all are struggling with. And so I want to use my comments today to really kind of talk about at least two sort of main threads and themes that we're seeing in the U.S. context, really around teacher preparation, because that's where a lot of my work sits in terms of how we prepare teachers. We've got some bigger challenges in terms of teacher retention, which I'll talk about in a minute. So I'll kind of share my screen to get into some of the details of that. So can you all, let me see. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we
Thumbs
can.
up? Yes. Okay, perfect. So again, this is really building on some of the work I've done with my most current book around Equity Now, and where in that work I really call for and talk about a much greater need to really think about structural disadvantage in our schools. And that disadvantage really lies along not just social class lines, but also falls along racial lines and language lines as well. And that has been something that's plagued the United States for centuries. And so that has been an ongoing challenge of trying to address structural inequality. But I think it's gotten even more challenging during the current administration. And without going into too much of the details, because I'll talk about some of that, the current administration has not been really kind, in my opinion, around trying to address some of these inequities. And I think schools have felt it and schools are seeing it. And so it's causing us to have to really radically rethink what it is we are doing in terms of how we prepare educators to walk into their schools, especially in our large urban cities. I'm in Los Angeles right now. Los Angeles has the second largest school district in the country, only behind New York. It serves about 500,000 students. And part of the challenge becomes teachers are oftentimes walking into those schools underprepared and not ready to face some of the demands that they see as they are entering in this current political terrain. So I'm going to talk about those things along with some issues around retention that we're seeing as well. Let me first start off again by just thanking you all for being here. My gratitude. I know it's evening where you are. Many of you have worked a long, hard day, and you probably want to wind down and enjoy your evening. But you're here, and that means a lot to me because I think it speaks to a level of commitment to think about how we learn, how we collaborate, how we grow as professionals when it comes to preparing our young people for the schools that they're going to enter. So thank you for being here, and I definitely look forward to hearing some of the comments and questions after I give this short presentation. So let me start off by sort of grounding my comments in someone, an author who I've always been fond of, and his name is James Baldwin. And I think that when I start all of my teacher education courses, we read an essay by James Baldwin titled "A Talk to Teachers." And James Baldwin writes this essay to teachers in 1962. And he writes it in a way that really tries to inform teachers or those who want to teach about the world that they are entering into if they choose to teach. And it's really poignant and powerful because basically what he says, if you understand the historical context, in 1962, the United States is quarreling with Russia. There's threats of war. There's deep-seated poverty. There's widespread inequality. There's a push for civil rights. And there's lots of upheaval in the United States at the time. And so James Baldwin, who's a social critic at the time, talks about the fact in this letter to teachers that we are living through a very dangerous time. And he talks about the fact that everyone who's in this work knows that we're in a dangerous time. And he talks about the threats and the challenges that we face politically, economically, socially. And so he says, if you're going to enter into classrooms, you need to understand that you have to be prepared to what he calls go for broke. And go for broke means you have to not just teach the word, but you have to teach the world to build upon Paulo Freire, right? You have to understand that there's an ecosystem in which young people live in, and that ecosystem is having a profound impact on the way that they enter into schools. So he's warning educators that if you're doing this work, you have to have a consciousness that is going to allow you to do it well. And what is so ironic about the work of Baldwin in this essay is that if you read it today, you would think that this letter was being written today, despite the fact that it was written over 60 years ago. So much of what he's saying has applicability in the current moment. It's like it's deja vu. And I think it's important to have our educators, especially our educators in training, to read Baldwin because of the fact that he's basically giving a warning to say that this work is hard, this work is demanding, this work is difficult under ordinary circumstances. And so it's even more challenging now in the face of, polarizing body politic. It's even more challenging in the face of the anti-immigrant sentiment we're seeing in our country. It's even more challenging given sort of the real sort of deep-seated political divisions that are really rife in our country right now. So I use Baldwin to kind of set the context for what I want to share because I think right now we are living through those dangerous times in another way. So the work of Baldwin has led me to start to look at some of the work around this work of several political scientists who talk about dystopia. And as I've been reading this work around dystopia, and a lot of folks in philosophy read it as well, and we've had some of our students read it as in our teacher education program, and they talk about dystopia as being essentially the opposite of utopia. They talk about having a social order where there is lots of suffering. They talk about having a world where there is hopelessness. Folks who write about dystopia talk about a world where there is deep despair, deep division. And part of what we have been looking at as we look at the work on dystopia is that there's some really frightening comparisons to our current moment. One of the scholars we read, Cassia Poprocki, talks about when you think about what dystopia looks like, it's a reality where government is trying to strictly control people's thinking. There's a desire to control news and information. There's a strong desire to censor those who are critical of the government. In some ways, it sort of mirrors anarchy. Frequently in dystopic societies, people are attacked if they are different. For anyone who criticizes the government structures, you are quickly deemed as being problematic. Technology becomes a tool to further divide people. There are attacks on the climate, and climate is not seen in ways that it should be. So all the work around dystopia is really sort of eerily sort of similar to what we are going through in this moment in the U.S. And it is palpable. You can feel the tension in certain parts of the country. People are oftentimes afraid to express opinions, and these things run contrary to what we in the States have always said was one of the things that makes us a democratic society is the right to free speech, which is a First Amendment right. People are now questioning if they can speak out and be critical of the government. People are questioning now if they can sort of challenge some of the ideas that are coming from the administration because the administration has been quick to squash any dissenting viewpoint. So I raise that because this is the ecosystem that we're asking our teachers to think about. What does it mean to teach at a time when there is censorship? What does it mean to teach at a time when dissenting viewpoints are really not allowed? What does it mean to teach in a city such as where I'm at in Los Angeles, which is largely immigrant, yet there is an anti-immigrant sentiment that is coming from the federal government. So these are the kinds of ways we talk about what it means to work in this moment, where, as I mentioned with Baldwin, you talk about dangerous times. The work of dystopia talks about these real troubling times where government is squashing dissent. And this is some of our context right now. And sometimes they say a picture can speak can speak more than 1,000 words. I mean, as I sit right now at a school in a part of Los Angeles that's in the heart of one of our largest immigrant communities, as I pulled up this morning, there are lots of school personnel who are out looking out after students who are trying to come to school, looking out for their parents, because we are in the midst of seeing the largest immigration rates that this country's ever seen. It is not uncommon right now to see large unmarked trucks, vans that have ICE agents who will exit them, who will grab people out of their cars, who will grab children taken from their parents. This is the current moment that we're in now. Schools are not sanctuary places for young people and their families. Schools have been really, I think, supportive and trying to provide as much in terms of the way of protections and supports for families, but they have made it clear that if immigration agents show up with warrants, there's nothing the school can do to prevent them from having access to people who they believe to be undocumented. And I say that at a time when we have a large undocumented population in Los Angeles, but they are part of the fabric of our community. And prior to this current administration, there was not the kind of anti-immigrant sentiment that you see now. In many ways, the federal government has kind of made this an us against them. And so you see some of the ways in which you have elderly people being taken from their homes. We've recently had 2 big deaths of protesters in Minneapolis. So this is just the moment, and this is the time that we're doing this work. And so we are talking to our educators about what does it mean to work in this moment. And part of what we've seen that, like I said a moment ago, there have been a number of arrests at school sites where ICE immigration customs enforcement agents have shown up at schools. So we've seen over the last year about a 40% decrease in attendance rates at certain schools. There's a fear that's palpable. Parents are not wanting to send their children to school out of fear of being detained. Parents do not want to walk their children to school out of fear that they themselves might be detained. And so what you're seeing is a real sense of fear about are schools safe places? And so the context here is kind of where we're at. Parents are protesting outside of schools in many instances. And I just want to kind of lift this up in ways that says that, we're having to rethink more online formats, more virtual opportunities to learn because many parents just do not feel comfortable sending their children to schools given the current moment. So I say that as a sort of a backdrop to say, again, we have a history in the United States of division, of separation, of segregation. And so many people have said that this current moment is reminiscent of what has happened to indigenous populations in this country centuries ago. It's very reminiscent of what we've done to African Americans in this country decades ago, and it's very reminiscent of the United States' long history of division, of planting seeds of us versus them, of planting seeds that say that poor people and people of color are the problem. And so we are, in many ways, deeply distressed at why we are in this moment, given our history of thinking we've made progress. So as we think about the preparation of teachers, we take them back to understand historically the fight for democracy, the fight for equality. Schools have oftentimes been one of the primary spots where that has taken place. And so understanding the role that schools play is vital in this particular time. Now, we also talk about the fact that much of this we maintain is rooted in racism, the anti-immigrant sentiment, the anti-indigeneity that we see. And part of what we do when we do our teacher preparation, we kind of give these socioeconomic sort of foundations when we talk about how inequality plays out. We talk about how racism is not just prevalent when it comes to education, but it plays out when it comes to who has access to employment and wealth. We've had significant redlining, so where certain communities are situated, people can live only in certain communities. We have seen massive, even before the current administration, food insecurities, where we see many of our children who come to schools, oftentimes dealing with deep-seated poverty, deep-seated hunger. We've got a healthcare system that has never been for all people. So you have large families, most of them poor, who face healthcare challenges. And the list goes on in terms of the current moment of policing and surveillance, a criminal justice system that continues to expand and lots of money is placed into it. And so we talk about the ways in which structural inequality is sort of baked into the fabric of so much of what the United States of America has done. And teaching in this moment has to be mindful of this reality. So when students show up and those students are oftentimes unable to engage, there could be a reason. We have a significant homelessness problem. Where I'm at in Los Angeles, we are considered the homelessness capital of the United States of America. On any given day in the state of California, where I'm at, there are close to 200,000 students who are experiencing homelessness, meaning these are young people who live in cars, they live in shelters, or in some cases, they even live on the streets. So we're talking about these factors because walking into schools today as brand new teachers, if you don't understand this, you'll be quickly overwhelmed by the social and economic challenges that young people face. Part of what we use, one of the texts that we're using this year has been the work of a scholar by the name of Eve Ewing. And Eve Ewing talks about the fact that schools in the US have always been anchored around these three pillars of racism. And she reminds us that one is that there has been this way in which there has been this idea of intellectual inferiority, where schools are set up in such a way that the history of only European Americans are prioritized. The histories of immigrants, the histories of non-whites, the history of women are typically sort of excluded from school curriculum. And so this idea of reinforcing whose knowledge and whose history is most important has always been a part of the fabric of schools. Though we have made strides, what I'll show in a minute is that we have been really regressing in this area as well. She says the second pillar has been about discipline and punishment. And one of the big challenges that we have in the United States is we over discipline, we over punish students in our school. Oftentimes, students who have mental health issues that are undiagnosed are quickly removed from classrooms, sent to special needs classrooms, or oftentimes just disciplined or excluded from schools altogether without understanding the deep-seated cause as to why we're seeing certain behaviors. And disproportionately, those young people are Native, or they're Black American, or they're poor or immigrant children. And so that's, again, sort of a recurrence of what we're seeing. And there's also been this really clear sense of what Ewing calls economic subjugation, where schools are shaping children not for leadership but for labor. And you ask the question, why do working class children oftentimes find themselves funneled into working class jobs? And that's a much larger conversation when it comes to the kinds of schooling. So again, we try to give our pre-service teachers a social foundations sort of take of America to understand how do you connect the past to the present. How is your pedagogy informed by these factors happening contemporarily? How does your pedagogy get shaped by those factors that have happened historically? So I raised that within the context of preparation, but I want to pause for a second and pivot, because part of what we're also concerned about is that we're seeing a significant decrease in people who are even choosing to enter the profession, which is deeply, deeply troubling. Here in the States, over the past 10, no, a little less than 10 years, a little bit before the pandemic, last 7, 8 years, we've seen about a 20% decline, which is significant, in applicants into teacher preparation programs across the country. And that is happening at a time when we're seeing a larger than typical number of teachers who are retiring from the profession. So we're seeing that our inputs and outputs are not even. We're seeing a higher number of outputs, folks who are retiring, coupled with a smaller number of folks who are entering into the profession, which leaves us in the teacher preparation world of trying to figure out how do we respond. And there have been particular areas that have been really, really challenge those individuals who are pursuing special education, math, science, and dual languages are the areas that are hardest hit. I'm at a school right now where the principal has said that there are at least 4 math classes that have been basically run by substitute teachers since the beginning of the year because they can't find credentialed teachers in math, especially in high need areas. I need to stress that because our high need areas have been difficult to staff because there's been a distribution issue with our teaching pipeline. Part of the reason why we're here is because our credentialing process, in my opinion, has been really problematic. The kinds of courses that we require pre-service teachers to take, the grade requirements are deeply, to me, unhelpful. And part of the biggest deterrent is that there are 600 clinical hours that pre-service teachers have to do before they're credentialed. And I might add, those 600 clinical hours are unpaid. So when you have individuals who want to pursue teaching, and if they are able to get through all the challenges of becoming credentialed, and then they have to do these 600 hours of student teaching, which is essentially equivalent to a full-time job with no pay. It's a big, big deterrent. Lots of pre-service candidates are saying, I just can't afford to give 600 hours in order to be credentialed. So we're facing some structural problems for those who even choose to enter that we have to talk about. So what we have to do, and we've been thinking really critical about this in the Center for the Transformation of Schools, is helping to kind of push for legislation that would pay student teachers. What would it look like to pay student teachers just a modest daily rate that we pay substitute teachers? For substitute teachers in some districts, it's as much as $200 a day. That will go a long way to at least helping to support those individuals economically while they're doing their student teaching. We need to significantly streamline and rethink our certification requirements. Part of what we continue to see and hear is that based off of the state guidelines, our students are spending far too much time in university classrooms, in my humble opinion, and not enough time in actual schools where the real learning takes place. And that's because there are a number of requirements around student development, language acquisition, all important courses, don't get me wrong. But if you really were to ask how many credit hours we require student teachers to have, is it sufficient in light of how much time they could benefit from being out in schools? And so we're also looking at grow your own programs. How do we start to work with school districts where they will identify individuals who are in schools, oftentimes what we call paraprofessionals who are already in schools who just don't have credentials, and help them to get on the pathway to begin to think about pursuing teaching credentials. And a big part of that, again, is financial incentives. There have been a number of initiatives that we've seen across the U.S. that has done loan forgiveness programs where students who choose to enter into the teaching profession, their loans are forgiven if they teach for a minimum of 3 years, or if individuals choose to teach in high need areas, there are stipends that are providing. So we have to think about sort of two things here, and that's what I talked about earlier, those two pathways. One, uh, how do we think about preparation in the current moment, which I'll come back to in a second. But I cannot divorce that from the fact that we are having a very difficult time even attracting people to the field in the first place. We have to start talking to high school students about thinking about teaching as career fields. Um, One program in one of the states here has talked at the school level. Uh, and to start teacher clubs to begin to plant the seeds early on to have young people think about teaching it as a career field. I always say this to current teachers: you are auditioning for the next generation of teachers, for better or for worse. What you do as teachers today will help to shape and influence the possibility of folks, either of young people pursuing this profession or saying that there's no way they would pursue it. So we have some real challenges we have to face in terms of helping to fortify that pipeline. So let me return back to the preparation part of this, because I think that's where we have more of our control in terms of how do we prepare teachers in the current moment. And I've been talking about this through my work around the equity now, around a framework that says that the preparation has to be anchored in these three pillars of justice, harm and repair, and belonging. Because I think the current moment of teaching requires teachers to have to know and do certain things that I don't know that were always as readily sort of required as they are now. And so we walk them through this. What does justice look like? And part of what we talk about is that we're seeing in this moment a significant erasure in school curriculum, a significant erasure in terms of what can and cannot be taught in schools. We see a significant minimalizing of certain kinds of histories and exclusions. We are now in the midst of seeing curriculum and history books being significantly rewritten. We are seeing a host of different ways in which that plays out. We are seeing what many refer to as a whitewashing of history. The experiences of LGBTQ plus folks have been banned in many states across the country. The teaching of Black or Indigenous histories have been banned or minimized. We have seen a significant book banning in the states where close to 4,000 titles, according to PEN America, have been eliminated from schools, and most of those books that have been banned have been largely by women authors, people of color authors, or members of the LGBTQ plus community. So there's deep concern about the current political climate that has put gag orders on discussions of race, gender, or sexual orientation. And so many of our pre-service candidates come to the teaching program, at least at UCLA, wanting to be able to talk about how identities are part of the curriculum, but they're being told in many places that that is not allowable. And so part of what we're also seeing is that the federal government has even engaged in what we call data erasure, where for years we were able to collect data based upon subgroups that allowed us to see how academic outcomes were going, attendance rates. We disaggregated data, but now in certain states, you can no longer collect that data along different classifications. So there's a deep seated concern about the erasure that is happening in the United States at this time. And part of the framework of justice and repair and harm talks about what is the harm that's done by this erasure. And so part of what we're trying to have our educators think about is what does it mean to be an educator who's committed to justice, where you think about doing what is right. Many teachers now are saying that they have to be more subversive than ever before because they want to make sure that they're making sure that they utilize a curriculum that speaks to histories that are oftentimes being eliminated or being significantly whitewashed. And so we're talking about how we prepare socially just educators. And we see this play out in different ways. And we walk our students through different kinds of examples of what does it mean when you have your most vulnerable students, your students who are from high poverty areas. How do we help them to get the kind of what we call wraparound services? Because oftentimes these are the same students who don't have access to medical care, don't have access to decent housing, don't have access to food. So we're trying to make sure that we have more what we call community resources, where we're bringing in those resources to the school, where we've got clinics where students can get access to medical attention if need be. We've got what we call food banks that are coming to bring food into school. So we're trying to think about in this moment the education of young people in a much more holistic way, thinking about this from a justice standpoint. But also talking to students about their roles and speaking about what they want. And we've seen a significant uptick in the last year of student protests, of students boycotting, of students speaking out, of students showing up at governmental offices saying that they believe that their schools are not serving them adequately. So part of what we talk about is that this justice sort of movement is like built around organizing, around finding other groups that are trying to advocate for teachers to be given the supports that they need, for families and students to be given the supports that they need. Part of what we're seeing in this era now for many of our student teachers is there is a much more activist bent to what they're doing because they see education as a harbinger for change. And if we can get it right in schools, we can hope that it has a trickle effect into wider aspects of our society. So the justice emphasis has been deliberate. The justice emphasis has been intentional, and the justice sort of commitment has been really intensified in the last couple of years. And we say that because the goal is to make sure we're like repairing harm. And in this moment, like I said, we continue to see young people who are just outright, like I mentioned earlier, fearful, afraid, uncertain, not sure how to respond. And schools, we believe, and we talk to our pre-service teachers, can play a role in repairing some of that harm. But part of what we ask them to think about is to acknowledge the complexity of the contemporary circumstances, and to repair and harm and to create more just schools means there has to be a deep-seated understanding of how inequality, poverty, racism, and sexism are enmeshed in some of the very ways in which our communities have existed over time. I'm in a school right now that's in one of the poorer parts of Los Angeles, and we have our student teachers here. But before they can come to the school, we engage in what we call a community immersion. For 5 days, they come and they talk to different community-based organizations. They talk to people who have lived in these communities. They talk to people to understand how this community has been so vital to people's opportunities and why schools are a really integral part of these particular communities. So they have to learn about communities, we believe, before they can teach in them. And they have to understand that the very circumstances that they are seeing as they walk the community, as they talk to the residents, as they learn about some of the political challenges, this is what shapes what they will see when they walk into classrooms. And so we are intentional that our student teachers are only placed in high need schools because that's where the greatest need is. There are other programs that place their student teachers into more affluent communities, and that's fine because the more affluent communities need teachers too. But we know where there's a great need, and we have been very unapologetic at UCLA for the better part of what, I mean, Brianna knows this, for close to 3 decades, past 3 decades of making sure that we've been intentional of placing our student teachers in the most complex and most underserved communities. And we also talk about, to our students about understanding the intersectional nature of this. And what we mean by that is that it's not enough just to talk about poverty, because poverty, while it cuts across all groups, we see that poverty impacts people of color at higher rates than anybody else. But it's not just poverty and people of color, but when you do a deeper dive, we see the poorest folks in certain parts of our community are women. So you're talking about women who are of color in poor and low-income communities. Those are the primary caregivers for many of our children, many of our students. And so to understand the ways in which some of our most marginalized groups are oftentimes immigrant women who are of color and who are poor. And so trying to understand the more complex ways of who we're serving is important. And then when you start talking about sort of the intersection with poverty and disability, that's another set of circumstances that are so real, or poverty and immigration status, or being in poverty and being someone who is non-Christian. We've seen an increase in the Muslim population in parts of Los Angeles. So again, understanding the levels of complexity to who we're serving is going to serve teachers well in this moment. I have to show this picture because this picture, if you're not familiar with it, is of a young 5-year-old boy by the name of Liam Ramos. And this picture has gone viral across the entire United States because young Liam is 5 years old. He was recently detained preschool in Minneapolis. It speaks to the current moment when you have a 5-year-old child who's taken from school because immigration aides believed that he and his family were undocumented. He was removed from school and then taken to his home as a way to lure his parents out so they could be detained as well. This picture, this situation has enraged lots of people in this country because we have wanted to believe that for years that at least safe spaces could be that schools could be safe spaces. But when immigration agents show up at schools and take young children as young as 5 years old, it's a wake up call. And this is the reality that we have to begin to wrap our heads around about what it means to work in a time, in a climate where this becomes a practice that young people as young as 5 years old are seen as threats to some who don't think they have the right to have an education. So part of what we continue to talk about too is making sure that as we talk to our pre-service teachers about their pedagogy, that they don't sort of participate in what we call a pedagogy of compliance. And because the nature of schools has been about making sure that teaching and learning is about orderliness, silence. Um, we don't really see in some classrooms, real deep learning where students are engaged in conversation. They're taught about productive struggle. Uh, I'm in a school now, like I said, when I finish here, one of our student teachers is with an amazing mentor teacher where student talk is what they do every period. Student engagement, student conversation, where teacher-centered conversation is not part of what they do. Part of what we want is that to move away from this focus on just completing assignments, um, preparing for the tests, teaching to the tests. We want to sort of minimize that and put a focus on learning and deep understanding. And that also means that we see situations where mistakes and risk taking are not tolerated for students, and there's more surveillance, discipline, and control. So we're asking our pre-service teachers to not engage in this pedagogy of compliance, and we try to be very intentional, and this is hard, to put them in classrooms with teachers who embody or who demonstrate what dynamic, what really sort of robust, complex pedagogy looks like, because those are the folks that we think they can learn from the best. But I must add, it's difficult at times because those teachers who do that are oftentimes stretched and oftentimes overburdened and have lots of responsibilities and duties. So we're in a real significant push to try to find more mentor teachers, but the mentor teachers are already being asked to do lots of things at their school, which at times, if I'm just being honest with you, we oftentimes have to place our student teachers in classrooms with teachers who may not be the best models because that's just the reality of who's available at times. So, part of what we also stress is trying to make sure that for our teachers in training, that when they leave our program, they're connected with larger groups or organizations that will support them. And there's a big organization here called the Institute for Teachers of Color, where they're about 500 strong. And what they do is that they're a group to support novice teachers, seasoned teachers, mid-career teachers. What we found over the years is that many of our pre-service teachers feel like they're part of a community when they're in their preparation programs, but when they leave, unless the school does something intentional, there is no real structured, consistent support group to help teachers process what they're doing, to look for resources, to identify strategies, to look for lessons and units. And so we're trying to be much more intentional to try to provide those kind of pathways so that they feel connected to larger organizations and larger groups. Because part of what we're also seeing here in the United States is that our retention rates are deeply troubling. In high need areas, we see that about half, 50% of all teachers leave within the first 3 years. So we've got to do not only a better job of recruiting teachers into the profession, uh, preparing them in ways that allow them to be successful, but then three, hoping that we can retain them in the profession. And we found that one of the things that makes a big difference in retention is having teachers feel connected to some larger organization of like-minded teachers who are able to support them throughout the work. going to take about another 10 more minutes and then I'll stop for Q&A. And so so let me kind of pivot as I talk about this work, because part of what we've also tried to do, and this has been easier said than done. I know Aileen and Brianna can understand this. We've been also trying to build a research agenda as we prepare educators, and that's easier said than done. And so part of it is, how do we document what it is that we're seeing in schools, what's working, what's not working. But you all know, for the work of preparing teachers and being out in schools and supervising teachers is labor intensive, and to try to like sort of intersect that with a research agenda is oftentimes challenging. So part of what we're trying to do is trying to get some of our PhD students from our program who have been former classroom teachers to be part of our teacher education programs, to begin to document some of what we're seeing. And so part of what we're wanting them part of what to see is, how do we build a multidisciplinary solutions-oriented approach? We're, for the first time, engaging different disciplines in this work. So we're now working with folks in mental health who are co-teaching some of our courses with us. We have folks in psychology who are co-teaching classes with our teacher ed faculty, because we find that they bring different lenses, even folks who are in social welfare, who help us to understand some of the ways in which resources exist in certain communities. And so that's why we have to think about how we sort of step outside of education to develop research agendas that allow us to think about sort of the robust ecosystem that our young people exist in, knowing that educators cannot do it all by themselves. Educators cannot fix all the challenges that young people come to school with, and it requires us to take a much more larger examination of the ecosystem that they're in. So, and we kind of use this kind of framing, like, how do we prepare teachers with criticality? And for years, at least in the States, there was a big focus on content knowledge, content knowledge, content knowledge. And students have to take so many hours of their content knowledge, which is important. We want our pre-service teachers to know, if they're going to teach English, if they're going to teach biology, if they're going to teach chemistry, that they are well versed in the content knowledge. And also, building on Lee Schulman's work, we also know that they have to have pedagogical knowledge. I mean, how do they develop instructional strategies, instructional approaches in order to teach that content? But we would argue now that it can't just be content and pedagogical knowledge, that now there's also a deep-seated need, as you've heard me say here today, of having socio-political knowledge. You've got to understand the community in which you teach. You've got to know that the history of that community. You've got to understand the migration patterns of certain students and their families. You've got to understand where deep-seated poverty exists. You've got to understand what we call resource deserts, where there are certain schools that are in communities where access to medical facilities, access to healthy foods is just non-existent. So there's a social political knowledge that you have to have if you're going to work in particular communities. And we also stress you have to have what we call authentic relationship knowledge. How do you build sustainable relationships with families in those communities that you teach? How do you build relationships with the businesses in those communities that you teach? And most importantly, how do you build relationship with the students that you interact with? And we talk about strategies and approaches to building relationships, because we think that goes a long way. Part of the challenge that we've seen is that we have some what we call career changers who are really well versed in their content knowledge, but don't have the relationship knowledge, don't know how to connect with young people. Or they may know their content knowledge really well, but they don't have the pedagogical knowledge. Or people who may have the content and the pedagogical knowledge, but just are completely unfamiliar with a particular community that they're working in, and they can become overwhelmed really quickly because of all the challenges that the community faces. So this is the anchoring sort of frame that we try to use across our program, so that individuals have a sense of kind of what's going to be required as they do this work. And we say that because, look, here's what we found in some of the research that we've collected. Recently, the National U.S. Department of Ed did a large survey of teachers of education school alumni, and to no one's surprise, about 2/3 of them almost said that their schools of education did not prepare them to cope with the reality of classrooms. That's a sobering wake-up call for all of us who prepare teachers. When folks are telling us that what I got is not what I needed, what I learned doesn't really help me. And I think a big part of that is that I go back to what I said earlier about rethinking and streamlining our curriculum from a teacher preparation standpoint. We spend far too much time, in my humble opinion, on theory, far too much time in university spaces, and not enough time having our student teachers in schools learning firsthand. So this data is a wake-up call for us, and we're trying to do some similar data collection with some of our alums to see, do they feel as if they were given the adequate skills to be able to teach in today's context. And some of that preliminary data has been troubling because the numbers are about not too far off from here. About half say that they felt like they were not prepared. They wanted more hands-on experience, or they just did not understand how to deal with students who have deep-seated emotional challenges and mental health problems. So this is our wake-up call in this moment to be mindful of that. And I raised that at a time where, and I'll get ready to close in a few minutes, we're seeing a deep-seated racial discrepancy around who teaches and who learns. As the United States becomes more ethnically and racially and culturally and linguistically diverse in terms of its students, the teaching population is doing just the opposite. What we see here with this data from the Department of Ed, as of just a few years ago, we see that overwhelmingly our teaching population is white, 100% middle class, mostly monolingual, and very few teachers who come from non-white backgrounds. And we also saw that in 23, 24, we had about 40% of schools, and this is the troubling part, about 40% of schools did not have a single teacher of color uh, at a time when our schools are becoming more and more diverse. And so we have to, I'm just adding another layer of complexity to this challenge. Not only do we need to, A, think about how we prepare our teachers, find a way to fortify our pipeline, we need to also make sure that pipeline is more diverse than it has been in years past. And if you look at the work of Chance Lewis says that part of the challenge is the teacher educators are even more racially homogenous. And we have to look at the makeup of who is preparing the teachers to go into particular communities, because that group has been largely white, largely monolingual. And so these are some of the challenges that we continue to face in these turbulent times. We put out a report a couple of years ago where we talked about how we can prioritize educator diversity. And in it, we have a number of different recommendations. Much of it is policy oriented, trying to put a focus on legislation that does some of the things I mentioned earlier around financial incentives, around loan forgiveness, around rethinking the number of hours required for student teaching. Part of what we know is that to get immigrant students to pursue teaching, many of whom are first generation college going students, it's just not doable to have a commitment of 600 hours of non-paid labor. So we offer a number of different ways that we think about how we can not just build the pipeline for future educators, but build it in a way that looks more and more like the student population that they're going to be serving. And we're going to continue to work with some lawmakers to see if we can kind of get some traction. The challenge that we face, and I hate to say this, but unfortunately, education is not the priority that it should be in the states. And as we see budget cuts happening, one of the first areas that gets cut is our education funding, and we're facing that right now. So this, I'm just showing you just some of the ways in which we are trying to think about our research agenda, again, to think about what are some of the ideal ways to think about how teacher preparation can unfold if we think about it in a more reimagined way. And we're trying to think about how we listen to communities, we spend time in communities. We are able to inform our pedagogy based off what people in the community say they want, what they need, what they hear, not what we think that they want and hear. I talked about the cross-system training model, where we're trying to have our teacher education students hear from people in other disciplines, because they need to understand our pre-service teachers about how other fields who study young people see the need for us to respond. So we're trying to think about this reimagination in a much more complex and robust manner to help us to push back on what has been not working for many of our pre-service teachers as they move into in-service teachers teaching. They're saying that they are not prepared adequately. We've used some of Rich Milner's work. He talks about consequential research. So as we're trying to establish this teacher education research agenda, we're asking all the folks who participate in it to think about one of these areas. Are we trying to understand and connect the work we do to a historical knowledge base? Does it expand what we know? What is it that we know about teacher preparation? What is it that we need to know? How do we amplify the researcher positionality folks who come to this work, many of whom have tremendous experience working in schools? And how do we prioritize the voices of those most marginalized? How do we talk to teachers who share with us what they wish they had gotten in their teacher preparation program, what they need today? I was at a school just 2 days ago with a group of high school educators who were with doing focus groups with us, and just powerful, powerful insights about just some of the challenges that they face in this current moment. So we're trying to make sure that as we reimagine this teacher preparation, we're doing so in a manner that is sort of steeped in a research agenda, because that will help us to increase the knowledge base. I'm going to skip I want to come here real quickly before I close, because part of what um, the work of Naila Nasir has been is really around learning, culture, and democracy. And she makes the argument that we should be thinking about how do we create more democratic schools, and those democratic schools should be squarely situated in a way that respects the diversity of learning. We've seen in the States a big approach on universal design learning, thinking about how we are able to think about the diverse ways of knowing, the diverse ways of processing, the diverse ways of thinking and communicating, and thinking about how we build equitable systems of learning that allow us to tap into the diversity of the students that we serve every day. And all of this is really rooted, as I close out, in really a deep question that we have to ask ourselves as a country is, do we have the moral conviction to support all of our students, of course, but to really support our most vulnerable youth? And that's been our focus from the outset with the center that I run, is that we're thinking about those students with disabilities. We're thinking about those students whose first language is not English. We're thinking about those students who come from deep-seated poverty backgrounds. We're thinking about those students who come from circumstances where they've been denied opportunity. That is going to be the makeup of our students in the years to come. And anyone who enters into classrooms, who enters into schools, who doesn't have a real sense of deep-seated conviction and a deep-seated compassion and a deep-seated commitment to trying to make sure we support our most vulnerable youth, we tell them that this may not be the work for you. This is not for the thin skin. It's not for the faint of heart. It's for people who really understand that this is hard work. It's difficult, it's challenging work, but we can make inroads, and we have made inroads. And so I'll close on this. We constantly tell our pre-service teachers that we want them to know, to care, and to act. Develop a knowledge base about the communities that you're going to work, develop a knowledge base about the students you're going to serve, but develop that knowledge base in a way that is deeply rooted in care, care for transformation, care for change, care for possibility, and then act. And we think that there's no more powerful way to act than to be in schools, in communities, with other educators to help to make schools the best it can be. So with that being said, I will stop right there. If like I have talked, lectured far too long, I want to leave some time, if we have it, to engage in some Q&A, to hear what your thoughts are or takeaways are of anything that I've shared with you, or that perhaps I've not shared, to get some insight. So thank you so much.